Hello, I'm Lucy McCarraher. I'm an author, a publisher of business books and founder of the Business Book Awards and also a book mentor. And I'm here with Keiron Sparrowhawk because we're both concerned about the Black Lives Matter movement, and we're both here to have a conversation about our role in this as privileged white people. So Keiron, introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Lucy, and first of all, thank you for bringing me to this. I think it's something that we must talk about, must debate, and bring about some action on. My background is as a neuroscientist, and I'm currently working on behaviour, how cognition drives our behaviour, our thinking, and I suppose maybe partly because of that, it's made me think more deeply about the Black Lives Matter movement and about white privilege. And my background wasn't actually that privileged. I came from quite a poor background. My dad was a bus conductor. I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s, 70s. But the schools I went to, there wasn't a black kid there. This is in South London. There wasn't a black kid in the school. And I remember we would have collections for Africa. And so we would save our pennies and that we'd send it off to Africa because they're poor, they're underprivileged. And aren't we doing great things in terms of putting it, sending money to them? But really, this was all part of our culture, was to say we're superior, we're in a better place, and if we're superior, then they are inferior. And I think this drives a lot of the thinking and behaviour today in everything we say. I recall recently I watched the Guys and Dolls, the musical, set in the 50s, fantastic stories, written originally by Damon Runyon. But this film, fantastic film, one black person was in the film, and he was a shoe shine boy. All the other characters were white. There were different races, but they was basically that was how it was perceived, how it's shown. They're the things that drive our culture. They're the things that we reflect upon, that makes our behavior, sets up our behavior now. That sets up this thing of white privilege, and basically looking down on others. And I think that's something that we've got to shake the roots of. We've got to shake that, really consider it. What are we doing? And not just for altruistic reasons, but I think for reasons of just in terms of the whole human species, how we're going to survive, how we're going to live together. Without this deeper thinking, I think we're on a road to ruin.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so bad for all of us. I mean, I also grew up in the 50s and 60s, but I was genuinely privileged. I lived a middle class life. I went to private schools, and there were no black people at my schools. And I read a book called Little Black Sambo. We sang songs about little brown children over the seas. I had a Golly Berry Jam badge. I mean, it's really too horrific to contemplate. But that's what goes into the mix. It goes into, you don't question it when you're young, and then when it becomes comfortable, I suppose, when you are the white privileged person, you stop seeing it. And I think my insight into it comes from being a woman, and over the last couple of years having done some campaigning for women to write and publish their business books because they were very underrepresented. And it's suddenly, I mean, I'm not a natural campaigner or somebody who stands up and goes to demonstrations at all, I'm sorry to say, but it did give me that insight into what it's like, to really understand how it is. And I did a fair amount of research about it, and you contributed to that, Keiron. What it's like to feel that in certain circumstances you literally have no voice. I mean, the George Ezra song Shotgun has a great line in it when he says he'll be riding shotgun feeling like a someone, and that's what you feel like as a white person most of the time. You feel like a someone. As a woman, sometimes you don't feel like a someone. You might go into a room or be in a space where actually it's mostly men, and you feel very much not like a someone. But for black and BAME people, must be like that an awful lot of the time, and that is unacceptable.
Yeah, I think there is this white male club, privileged club, and they build up barriers for anyone else entering it. They build up barriers to women. They build up barriers to people of other colours, of cultures, races, and it's about maintaining their status quo. They're in a privileged position, and they want to maintain that, and hence, whether they purposefully or whether they by not thinking, they're perpetuating the current standards by which we say we are superior, you are inferior, therefore we know better than you, and so on and so forth. It works down through that. And I think we're intelligent enough that we should be able to begin to question some of those norms, some of those precepts that are out there. It's like cognitive dissonance that makes it just float along in our lives without thinking. It's not good for us. Diversity is good for us. Diversity of thinking, of inclusion, they're what's good for us. If we can only overcome that fear, which stops us from reaching our hands out to help others, to look after others.
Well, what really brought it to my attention, well, this is the women thing rather than the diversity thing particularly, was that the first year of the Business Book Awards, although we had half as many entries from women authors as from men, but every single winner of all the awards, and that was 11 of them, were all white men. And of course, had a nice gender balanced panel of judges, and of course nobody was looking to be discriminatory in any way. And it is that thing we now politely call unconscious bias, but somehow it had added up to the fact that we thought that the best 11 books were all written by white men. And so that's where it made me start to think, no, we have certain perceptions about things, but they are so underground, they're so buried, and we don't see what we're looking at as or how we're feeling as being the default position. And that has to be unpicked, and you have to dig into it, and it is uncomfortable. And I do hear Black people saying that they're not saying this to make white people feel guilty or uncomfortable. But I feel that if we don't feel a certain amount of guilt or certainly discomfort, we won't do anything to change it, because the situation is currently perfectly comfortable for us if we choose not to see it and be disturbed by it. So it's about helping us to see the situation and helping us to take action. But then, you also as a white person can feel that, am I taking the right action? Could I be being offensive? Could I be being patronizing? Might I accidentally offend someone? So I'm doing some consulting with Black and BAME authors and women, and trying to find some action points that I can usefully make. But it's not easy for any of us, I think, and it is it is understandable when some white people say, but I don't feel privileged. I don't see what that means.
Yeah, and again, if I look at this, it was like from a psychology point of view, from a cognitive point of view, we humans are frail. We humans, is part of our gene makeup, and we can talk about this if you like, part of our genetic makeup makes us stressful, makes us fearful of others. It would do so. We have to use our intelligence, we have to use our abilities to overcome that, to see that if we can work as we rather than you or I, we're actually going to achieve far more. In particular, the more diverse we are, we will achieve far more than we will as an individual. I sometimes think back, my last company, Perspective, I ran the London office there. We built it up to 30 odd people, and the London office particularly was like our international office. We had 5 offices in the US. They were quite diverse. I used to visit them as often as I could, and we had a diversity of people there. But in the London office, we had in that office of 34 people, we had 20 nationalities. We had 18 different languages, and it almost came about, not that we planned it that way, but it came about by chance because we were working internationally, and we couldn't set up offices in all the countries of the world, so we brought people from them to work in London. And actually, it was one of the best atmospheres I've ever worked in. The people were fantastic. And I always, I had this joke that, in business, you always hire people that are smarter than you. In my case, it's easy. Well, maybe it's not a joke, it's true. But you look for when you're looking for the skills in someone where they're better than you, suddenly you catch people, they are. You've got something that I don't have. And why is that? Because you've got a different upbringing, you've got a different way of looking at it. And that actually adds when we add it together with others, there's something hugely valuable in that we can then, there is a case of we were selling services, we were selling consulting. But beyond that, there was just something, something brilliant in terms of we were all together. And that was one of the best experiences of my life, was working in that office, because the people got on so well. It was like I said eventually like a little mini United Nations. But if we can overcome all the biases, that cognitive dissonance, that unconscious bias that we have, the fear of each other, look what we can achieve by doing so.
So as a neuroscientist, Keiron, how does that work, and how can we use our brains to change our thoughts?
So one of the things looking at it from cognition is looking about how does our brain develop, and part of that also look at it from an evolutionary point of view. Why did our brain develop in that way? And one of the things that you notice in terms of from a very early age, almost as whilst we're still babies, we learn facial recognition. So we recognize we can bond with our parents, which is a good thing. You bond with parents, and that's good. It gives that baby security. The other thing that the baby does in terms of, if it doesn't recognize a face, it knows it's not a parent, it knows it's not a sibling, it knows it's not a family member, and the child is more likely then to cry. And this is where, again, from an evolutionary point of view, when we were small tribes, if children came across people they didn't recognize, it was likely that those people were from another tribe, and they would therefore alert the rest of their tribe. There are people here that I don't recognize, we could be attacked. So it drove fear, but it was for protection.
Yes, that's fascinating, yes.
Now, over time, this was when we were small tribes, 100, 150 people. Over time, we realized that by joining together our tribes and building up, we had more security, we had more safety, we had more means of looking after each other by using that diversity of thought. So we had to overcome that sort of like basic genetic instinct of being fearful about others, of saying, can we find ways that we can reach out, that we can actually work together? And in a sense, that's what we know today, that by having diversity, if you have a diversity of board in terms of inclusion of men and women, of different races, different cultures, different languages, etc., that board for a company is going to be more successful. That company is going to be more successful than if you just the stale white, middle-aged in place, men in place. So it means that through education, we can overcome those basic genetic instincts, and by nurture, we can actually build a better world by doing so. Because if we stick to the concepts of I'm fearful of anyone that doesn't look the same as me, that drives the type of behavior which eventually will just kill us all off.
Yeah. So actually, perhaps we should also be using self-interest as a driver for this, to say that if like you and I, we're running companies, it is far better, and our companies can be more profitable if we notice this, if we become aware that our default position of just employing who comes to us. And I put my hands up. I mean, Rethink Press, we publish some amazing Black and BAME authors, some of whom tell an extraordinary story, and I'm incredibly proud of publishing those books and getting them out there. But on the other hand, I have to say that our team is predominantly white. We employ people. Well, we're all freelancers, but we work with people who we advertise for in what you would call in publishing the normal places, or we're recommended people, but we haven't actively looked for people of color in terms of diversity, but actually, of course, it would serve our clients better. It would show authors coming to us that we have a wider understanding of the world, and it would in generally, no doubt, serve us well financially as well. So perhaps that's where we have to indicate that white privilege is actually not is not privileging us. It's in fact causing us problems. It's just sort of one of the things that that I always remember really clearly is when I was on a committee with a group of much more elderly than me, white people. We were talking about accents, and one incredibly posh man said, "Of course, I don't have an accent." And it's that sort of, it's that sort of assumption that you are just the norm. You are the white, the vanilla, literally, and everybody else has an accent or is different. And that's what we have to stop, stop perceiving ourselves as.
And again, it's really, it's like a simple education can overcome that, provided we open our eyes. And maybe sometimes we need others to help us open the eyes for us. But as you were saying there, how do you write an advert for a job advert? What language? Because the language you use may not only put off people of colour, but also put off women. Could put off people of age, people of all forms of diversity. So the way you write an advert, and you said you go to the normal places, maybe you've got to go to the abnormal places to advertise as well. Because are you reaching as diverse an audience? So I think those simple things we could learn from. And it's comes back to, again, this thing in terms of we working together to do this. So where it has worked, where it does work, we should really highlight those and say, look, if you're going to stick with the stale old way of doing things, you may have some form of success, but it's going to be on a much lower level than it could be. Here's what, if you really, really want to get on, here's that. So forget altruism. This is actually something that is good for you as a business person. And at the same time, you're doing something that's sustainable. It's good for your business. It's also good for your society. If you've got children, it's good for your children and your children's children. This is something where you're truly leaving a legacy by improving the world that we're in, rather than taking advantage of what you can and leaving behind a burnt out husk, as I think sometimes as humans we're prone to do.
Yes. So are you making any moves, any actions in your own business, or do you feel that you're well set up in terms of diversity? And
I don't think you can ever be complacent. So it's a case of if when you get the opportunity to practice these things, practice them. So in terms of like when you're bringing on board people, reaching out to many places. With my cognition, it's almost like we've got an assessment which we call MyCQ, which is a cognitive assessment. Right from the first time that we built that assessment, we built it with multiculturalism in mind. We wanted this to be universal, so that it could work across all ages, genders, health states, races, cultures. So that way we had something where we could compare and contrast cognition across all of those without comparing apples and oranges, without making assumptions, or that's why it worked here, that's why it didn't work there. I know we've still got room to improve upon that. But basically what that shows is that in terms of cognition, which is our thinking, our behavior, we get the binomial distribution curve whatever population we go into. Now, where I think it's pertinent in terms of to the BAME movement, is that particularly in certain countries like the UK, this is a population that's under lots of stress. They're usually the adults they'll have lots of jobs, not one job. They'll have several jobs to keep their families together. That means they're probably out of the house most of the time. Then they're not with their families. No, not with their face to face with their children. The stresses and that brings about is harsh on them. This is having a negative impact on them. So when you see the peaceful demonstrations occurring, it's almost a reflection upon that. This is a people that we are not being very nice to. This is a people that we, over centuries, with the statues and that type of thing. But look in the face. This is superiority. That's why we put these people on statues. Know your place. And we've really got to question all of those things in terms of bringing about a more equal society, but equally saying to the people like that, because the pressure we put you in, we're actually making you ill.
Yeah.
And it's a wonder that you're behaving in as good a way as you are, because of the impact that we are having upon your lives in such a negative way. And whether we do it purposefully, and I think some people do it purposely to maintain their positions of authority, their position of privilege, or the rest of us that go along with it because for an easy ride, just because we can't be bothered to think about it, somebody else can think about it. Yes, there we have to change. So yes, Keiron Sparrowhawk, have to change in terms of my outlook on my life, on the world that I want to leave for my children, my children's children, to make this a better place than it is at the moment. Because in so many ways, we as a species, we've been around 200, 300,000 years. Look at the mess we're making of this beautiful planet. And in some ways, the sooner we're gone, the better.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, indeed.
So let's make it a better place.
Yeah.
For all,
for everyone. I've just been reading Chris Wilson's book, The Master Plan, which actually won the Business Book Awards International Award this year. And it's just extraordinary. I mean, he had the worst. I mean, Chris is black. He was born in and brought up in the kind of worst environment in Baltimore in the States. And he was in prison by the time he was 17 for 15 years. And he has now come out and is an incredibly successful social entrepreneur, making life better for other people. But one of the things he said that I really hadn't considered before, that simply being brought up as a child in the environment he was in, was unbelievably stressful, was traumatic, and he suffers from PTSD as a result of that. Just, he never slept as a child because he was always scared of police coming, of fights kicking off, of his home being broken into, it just, that when I compare that with, my own childhood, it's just beyond bearing, really.
And I think, again, people that come from that experience, if they're able to grow, they take that experience with them. And if they're able to grow in a good way, they then become unique in terms of unique human individuals that can then, hopefully through their wisdom, they can say, this is how we can avoid that pain for people. So it's what was a really negative stress, and he probably wouldn't want his worst enemy to have to go through the things that he had to go through.
No, quite.
But yeah, so how can we avoid that? How can we live our lives where we don't have to go through that pain? But people that are born with privilege they may be in a very good position to be able to think about these things, but they don't have that experience. And it's the experience, it's the wisdom that people that have been through it, they're the people we should be listening to. They're the people, again, we should put our hands out to and saying, what can we do together? Yeah. What can we do from learning from your experience to bring this about? I think, someone like Nelson Mandela in prison for 27 years, he could have come out in prison and he was, he knew he was going to become president of the country. So could have said, all you whites, get out. This is our country, indeed. Get out.
Yeah.
And he didn't. He said, we need a rainbow country. We need a mixture. We need a mix of people. We need a mix of cultures. We need a mix of thinking in order for this to be successful. Now, if you like, his legacy, it looks shaky at the moment. And it's the same in terms of someone like Gandhi, who he was actually quite privileged in some ways, where he was born into a privileged family, became a lawyer, etc. But put up with all the racism, all the deleterious aspects of the culture of the time. He too came back and said, we've got to find peaceful ways of working through this. And it's those people who put their hands out and say, we've got to find peaceful. We've got to love each other rather than hate each other. We've got to overcome that basic fear. If we can overcome those basic fears, which work on our behavior, we could have a better world. And it's looking at people like that set these things off and saying, can we build upon these? And so Chris wrote the book, how can we get him? How can we use people like him and his views?
Yes, it's those people who are quite unbelievably extraordinary. I mean, everybody's flawed, all leaders are flawed. Future generations will come back and look at all of them and quite probably have criticisms of certain aspects of their lives, but the people who can go through that experience and then come out of it with love and look for ways forward, peaceful and truth and reconciliation ways forward, are the extraordinary ones, and we should look to them.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I can't remember the exact quote, but there was quite a bit in terms of leadership. Leadership is how you get the best, how you get people to do the impossible things. And I think this is where you can drive people in those ways. You can motivate people in those ways, provided you're motivating them. This is going to be good for you. It may not be good for me, but this is what's going to be good for you. If that's behind your motivation as a leader, then it's good leadership. It's when the leadership is exploitive. Do these things because this will help me maintain my position of power, my position of privilege, my monetary position, whatever it is. So it's having the ability to question that type of leadership, and promoting and putting people into place who will go there in terms of, I'm doing this out of service for you. And I use that word, it's a very strong word, love, but I'm doing out this because I love you. We don't like using words like that because it's too emotive and too many connotations.
Too British.
Yeah, but that's basic. I'm doing this because I love you as fellow human beings. And sometimes I'm asking you to do things which means we have to make sacrifices overall. But this is going to be good for us all in the future. It's got to be sustainable. And it's having that look on life, I think, that's as I say, it comes from education, but it comes from, as we're doing now, it comes from not just sitting on your backside and saying, isn't this a bad thing? What can we do from an active point of view to bring this about? Putting our heads above the parapet, and even as white people, saying to people of colour, how can we work with you to bring this about?
Exactly, and using what is our privilege to advocate for them, to be their allies, and to take action in places where at this point they may not have voices, they may not be a someone, and we can be that someone for them, without being patronising or offensive in any way, is what I hope to do in a small kind of tiny area that I might have some influence in.
Definitely, I mean, like I said, to be a human is to make mistakes. So we will make mistakes, but if our heart's in the right place, if we say that we're doing this, we're trying to do this to benefit all, and we make mistakes, hopefully people will forgive us just as we'll be forgiving of others. And often it's asking ourselves and asking others, why are we doing certain things? Why does we had a racist incident this weekend where someone attacked someone with knives, killed 3 people. Why did that young man commit those atrocities? What was behind it? So we can often be, in terms of seeing the what, and then it's easy to say we can blame someone, we can punish someone. We don't often enough ask, why did they get to that stage? And it's been in asking why several times over that we may be able to get to the cause of these things and to be able to do something about them together. We can do something about them.
Yeah. Okay, Keiron, thanks so much for this conversation. I've found it very enlightening myself. I'm very interested by your neuroscientific knowledge on that point, and it's helpful to discuss it. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Lucy. It's things like we should do this more often.
Yeah.
And okay, thank you for bringing back. You've motivated me to think more about this since you put the invitation out, and hopefully I will then act in a different way, in a better way, going out from this than I would have done otherwise. So thank you for that, and I'd love to do more things with you.
Yes,
in this area.
Let's think of some. Let's work with other people and take some action. Thanks, Keiron.
Take care.